Okay, so have you ever caught yourself just kind of going through the motions? Just ticking off those boxes every day, like work deadlines, chores around the house, and you're like, is this it? Is there something bigger I'm missing? Could all the stuff I'm doing actually have a deeper meaning?
I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling, like wanting our actions to mean something more. We're constantly busy doing things, but sometimes it's hard to see the point of it all.
Well, in this deep dive, we're going to explore a guide that tries to answer those questions. We're going deep into Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga.
It's really a fascinating work. It gives you this whole new perspective on how the work we do is tied to our personal growth.
So to our listeners, maybe you're into Eastern philosophy already, or maybe you're just looking for a new way to think about your everyday life. No matter where you're coming from, we want to make exploring karma yoga clear and easy to understand. No confusing jargon, just those aha moments.
Exactly. We don't want to get lost in the abstract ideas. We want to make sure Vivekananda's teachings are clear and resonate with you, even if you've never heard of karma yoga.
Okay, so just a little background. Swami Vivekananda gave these talks as free lectures in New York City way back in the late 1890s. It's pretty cool. They were all recorded by a stenographer named Joseph Josiah Goodwin, who actually became a follower of Vivekananda. His notes are what became the book Karma Yoga. And what we're trying to do today is pull out those practical nuggets of wisdom from Vivekananda's teachings, the kind of stuff you can use every single day, no matter who you are or what you believe.
So, where should we start? Let's break down what karma actually means.
Yeah, karma comes from the Sanskrit word kri, which just means to do. So basically, any action is karma.
Exactly. A lot of people associate karma with the consequences of your past actions, but in karma yoga, Vivekananda is mostly talking about karma as work, like any activity, physical or mental. Think of it like the energy you put out into the world.
So it's not just about your job or what's on your to-do list. It's way broader than that, right?
Totally. Vivekananda makes a point that even things we wouldn't normally consider work, like listening to this deep dive, talking to a friend, even breathing or taking a walk, are all forms of karma. Everything you do leaves a mark.
Okay, so all these actions are karma. But how does that actually shape who we are? Vivekananda spends a lot of time on the connection between karma and our character.
Right, and that's what's so fascinating. Vivekananda links what we do to the very core of who we are. He says our character is built up from all our tendencies, kind of like the sum total of our inclinations, and these inclinations are shaped by all the karma we've accumulated throughout our lives.
Makes sense. It's like every experience, every choice we make adds a little something to the bigger picture of who we are. But he also talks about pleasure and pain, good and bad times, and how those shape us too.
Yeah, and this is a really important point. He says that both the good and bad stuff we go through are equally important to building our character. In fact, he even suggests that the hard times, the painful moments, can teach us more than when things are easy. They force us to look inside ourselves and become more resilient.
Which goes against what we usually think, right?
Yeah,
Usually we think happiness is the goal.
it does. But Vivekananda challenges that idea. He says that pleasure and happiness don't last. They're fleeting, like waves. He's more aligned with a central idea from Eastern philosophy, the idea that the real goal of being human is to gain knowledge and wisdom, not just chasing those temporary happy feelings. He sees both the ups and downs as teachers on this lifelong journey of learning.
So it's not about trying to avoid all the bad stuff, but actually learning and growing from whatever life throws at you.
Exactly. Every experience leaves a lasting impression on us, good or bad. Vivekananda uses a really powerful analogy to describe this. He compares these impressions to waves crashing on the shore. Each wave on its own doesn't seem like much, but over time, the constant pounding shapes the coastline. Our daily actions, even the seemingly small and insignificant ones, they build up and they end up defining our character. He says if you want to understand someone, don't just look at the big things they do, but pay attention to how they act in those ordinary, everyday moments.
Hmm. That's a great way to think about it. It's the little things we do consistently, not the big heroic acts that really shape us.
Yeah.
Now, he also talks about a power inside all of us and how work can help us discover it.
This connects to a really fundamental idea in Eastern thought that all knowledge, whether it's about the world or about our spiritual nature, it's already there inside us, deep in our minds. Vivekananda has this beautiful image of fire hidden within flint. It's just waiting to be sparked.
And the things we experience, the actions we take, the blows, as he calls them, the things that create this spark.
Exactly. He uses these words suggestions or blows. And what he means is every mental and physical challenge, every interaction, every single experience we go through, they're all like friction that brings out that inner knowledge and power. So, from this perspective, everything we do, everything life throws at us, and how we respond, it's all a form of karma. It's all revealing what we're capable of.
So work, and I mean work in the broadest sense, is like this tool for learning and evolving. It helps us unlock our potential. Now, this brings us to a really interesting idea, working without selfish motives. This seems like a big deal in karma yoga.
Oh, it's absolutely central. Vivekananda introduces this powerful concept of working for work's sake. It means doing what needs to be done without being driven by recognition, fame, or any kind of reward, even heavenly rewards.
Honestly, that sounds really hard.
Yeah.
Isn't there always some kind of personal motivation, even if it's just that feeling of satisfaction when you do a good job?
That's the challenge, and Vivekananda acknowledges that. He says it's natural to have some self-centered motivations at first. The goal of karma yoga is to gradually purify our motives over time. And he says in the long run, acting unselfishly is actually more rewarding, both morally and for our own happiness and peace of mind. But he's also realistic. He says getting to that point takes time and a lot of effort.
So it's like retraining your mind to act without expecting something in return.
Exactly. And Vivekananda believes that even if you can only act without a selfish motive for a short time, it shows you have some underlying moral strength. He says learning to control our natural desires for personal gain, that self-restraint is a much stronger sign of inner strength than just giving in to whatever we want. The focus shifts from what you get out of something to the intention and the action itself.
This self-control idea seems connected to what he talks about with finding balance between being active and resting. Those seem kind of like opposites.
And what's so insightful is how Vivekananda pictures this ideal person, someone who can be fully engaged even in moments of quiet and solitude, and at the same time stay calm and centered, even when things are super hectic. He says self-control is the key to achieving this kind of balance. It's all about mastering your inner state no matter what's happening around you.
Like finding that inner peace even when there's a storm raging outside.
Exactly. He knows that we all start with self-interest. But by being aware of why we do things and consistently trying to examine our motives, we can gradually become less selfish. It's a journey, not a quick fix.
Now, you mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, and Vivekananda brings up the story of Arjuna to talk about resistance and non-resistance. At first, it seemed a bit contradictory to me.
Right, and the important thing to understand here is that Vivekananda is making a subtle point. He uses Arjuna's hesitation to fight as an example to show that sometimes two extremes can look alike on the surface. He says there's a huge difference between not resisting because you're weak and not resisting because you're strong, and understand things on a deeper level.
So, like, there's a difference between being passive because you feel like you can't do anything and choosing not to fight because you see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And Vivekananda says that giving up because you're weak is actually harmful. He says that sometimes you have to actively resist evil in order to get to real inner peace. He says real calmness doesn't come from ignoring your desires or avoiding action altogether. It comes from engaging with the world, fulfilling your responsibilities mindfully, and then reaching that equilibrium not by pretending you don't have any desires.
That makes way more sense. It's not about escaping or denying, but finding peace through action and then going beyond it. Now, let's get into the idea of duty and your place in life, especially how he explains it within the Hindu tradition.
Okay, so in Hinduism, they talk about different stages in life, each with its own duties. You have the student, the householder who's raising a family, the retired person, and the sannyasin, who renounces worldly life. Vivekananda makes it very clear that no one stage is better than another. They all have their own important roles in society and in the spiritual journey.
That's cool. It's pretty egalitarian. We often put certain roles or lifestyles on a pedestal in our society.
And Vivekananda pushes back against that hierarchy. He uses this image of a king and a street sweeper to show that true greatness doesn't come from the job itself. It comes from the spirit you bring to whatever you do, the dedication. He says it could actually be much harder to be in the world, dealing with everything, and still be true to higher principles than to just drop everything and become a hermit.
He goes into a lot of detail about the duties of a householder, taking from a text called the Maha Nirvana Tantra. What are some of the key things he emphasizes?
A householder's duties are quite demanding, according to this text. You have unwavering devotion to God, but you also have all these worldly obligations. But you do it all without getting attached to the results. Serving your parents is super important because they're seen as representing the divine. Treating your wife with respect and love is a big one too, along with raising your children the right way with love and guidance.
Wow, it's a lot to juggle.
It is. And there are also obligations towards your siblings, other relatives, the poor in your community, and society in general. You're expected to help wherever there's need. You also have to earn an honest living, and laziness is like a big no-no because the householder is the backbone of society. And it's interesting, Vivekananda says that earning money the right way and using your wealth generously is actually considered a form of worship for the householder.
That's a whole different way to think about money. It's not about hoarding it, but using it ethically.
Right. And he says weakness is not okay for a householder. You have to fulfill the duties that come with your place in life. And to make this point, he uses stories like the one about the king and the sannyasin and the one about the selfless birds to show that everyone has their own place and their own unique set of responsibilities.
Those stories really bring the idea to life. Now, let's move on to the idea that all work has a mixture of good and evil in it, and the whole concept of non-attachment. This seems like a cornerstone of karma yoga.
Vivekananda is a realist. He says that when you do things in the world, you're bound to create both positive and negative effects, even if you can't see them right away. And that's why he keeps coming back to this central teaching from the Bhagavad Gita. You should always work, but don't get attached to the results.
But how do you even do that, not getting attached? It feels impossible in our world where everyone is so focused on outcomes.
To explain this, Vivekananda uses the concept of samskara. Think of it like an ingrained habit or a mark left on your mind from all your actions and thoughts. He has this analogy of a lake. Every action, every thought creates a ripple. And even after the ripple fades, it leaves a trace on the bottom of the lake. Over time, these traces add up and they influence how you think, how you act, and who you become.
So everything you do, good or bad, leaves a trace that shapes you.
Exactly. And all these good and bad impressions, they build up and become like driving forces within you, shaping your very nature. To make non-attachment a bit clearer, think about this. You meet tons of people in your life, but you only remember the faces of the people you really care about because there's a deeper connection there. The point is to approach your work and your interactions like a traveler, not getting attached to anything, always remembering that the whole of nature is for the soul, not the soul for nature. Your true self is beyond all the material stuff and the ups and downs of life.
It's like recognizing that your true self is bigger than the material world.
Exactly. He compares slaves' work, which is driven by selfishness and fear, with master's work, which is done from a place of freedom and love. He says real love always brings happiness and peace. Attachment, on the other hand, is like a jealous lover. It leads to suffering when things don't go your way. Unattached giving, like how parents give to their kids without expecting anything back, frees you from that kind of pain. And he also brings up the idea of worship as a way to practice selfless action. You do this by offering the fruits of your labor to a higher power.
And he tells that powerful story of the Kurukshetra sacrifice and the mongoose to really illustrate selfless giving.
Yeah, that story shows how the real value of giving isn't about how much you give, but the pure intention behind it. It's about giving without any expectation of reward, even being willing to sacrifice your life without a second thought.
Now, how about we talk about how duty can be subjective and the concept of universal virtue? It seems like what one person considers a duty can be totally different for someone else.
Vivekananda is really sharp about this. He says that what constitutes duty depends on your conscience, how you were raised, and what society says. He gives some interesting examples, like how different religions have opposite views on eating beef, or the thugs who actually thought robbing and killing was their religious duty, or how we praise soldiers for killing in war.
So what one person thinks is right, another person might see is totally wrong.
Exactly. But even with all this subjectivity, he offers a more personal way to figure out your duty. He says any action that brings you closer to your own inner divinity and helps you grow spiritually, that's a good action, your true duty. And anything that leads you away from that growth is not. He also introduces this Sanskrit saying, do not injure any being. Not injuring any being is virtue. Injuring any being is sin. That's a pretty universal ethical guideline.
So the details of your duties might be different, but the idea of not causing harm is something everyone can agree on.
Right. And he says it's really important to try and see other people's duties from their point of view, not judging them based on your own beliefs. He reminds us that true greatness is in how you do your duty, not what the duty is. And he says that if you consistently act from a sense of duty, you eventually reach a point where you just act selflessly without even thinking about it. Work becomes a form of worship.
That sounds like a really advanced state. Now, what about when he says it's about helping yourself, not trying to help the world? That's another one that seems kind of counterintuitive.
Well, Vivekananda's perspective is that when we think we're helping others, we're actually helping ourselves grow and evolve. He says that the universe, in its grand scheme, doesn't really need our help. He uses this analogy of mice running on a wheel. He's saying that our efforts to make the world a better place are more about exercising our own morals and spirituality.
So maybe wanting to do good is more about our own journey than fixing something broken in the world.
Right. He says the world already knows what it's doing and will keep on going whether we interfere or not. He says we should look at our desire to do good as a privilege. It's a chance to purify our own hearts and reach our full potential. He says we should be thankful for every opportunity to give and serve, but he also warns against getting too attached to our good deeds or becoming fanatics. He says the people who have the most positive impact are the ones who are balanced and have genuine sympathy and love for others.
So it's about serving others with humility, recognizing how it helps us grow. This brings us to the idea of non-attachment as complete self-abnegation. This is getting pretty deep.
Right. So Vivekananda says that every action has a reaction, both for you and for others. And these reactions can either strengthen your good habits or your bad ones. He also points out that no action is completely good or bad in its effects. So the point of karma yoga isn't to create a perfect world, which isn't even possible. It's about going beyond that good and bad duality by completely letting go of your ego. It's about dissolving that sense of I into something much bigger.
So it's like transcending the limits of your ego.
Exactly. He connects the different paths of Yoga Jnana Yoga, which is about knowledge, Bhakti Yoga, which is about devotion, and Karma Yoga. He connects them all to this goal of getting rid of the ego. He says there's a whole range of human behavior, from people who are completely selfless to people who hurt others just for fun. And he uses these Sanskrit words pravriti, which means being focused on yourself, and nivriti, which means turning away from yourself. He says that morality and religion start with turning away from selfishness and lead to self-sacrifice.
So even if you're not religious, trying to be selfless and self-sacrificing is still aligned with these spiritual goals.
Right. He says that the world, when talked about in a spiritual context, often means selfishness and ego, and God represents the ultimate unselfishness. Since everything we do in the world has good and bad consequences, the solution is to act without being attached to what you get out of it. He even brings up this extreme idea from Jainism about slowly withdrawing from all actions. But he says that's a flawed approach.
So the solution the Bhagavad Gita offers, as Vivekananda interprets it, is to be in the world, do things, but understand that you're not your ego and that you shouldn't act just for your own benefit.
You got it. Actions done for yourself create these chains that bind you. Selfless actions don't. And he quotes this really strong statement. Even if he killed the whole universe, he is neither the killer nor the killed when he knows that he is not acting for himself at all. He wants us to kill that selfish part of ourselves, the old man, and see the world as something more than just a place for our own pleasure. He uses this analogy of a nurse taking care of a baby, total dedication and love, but without any sense of ownership, recognizing that everything ultimately belongs to God. He also warns against thinking that other people need us. He says that belief is actually the root of attachment and pain. He reminds us that nature takes care of everyone, and that we should see helping others as a privilege that teaches us valuable lessons. And non-attachment frees us from being affected by the world's reactions, good or bad.
And that story of the wise sage Vyasa and his son Shuka at King Ganaka's court, it really shows how to be unaffected by what's happening around you.
It does. Shuka remains totally calm even when he's ignored and then treated like royalty. It's the perfect example of non-attachment. Vivekananda says that when you master your mind this way, you start seeing the world as harmonious, even heavenly. And he says that all the different paths of yoga lead to this state of complete selflessness. He makes it clear that it's super important to put all this into practice, not just understand it intellectually. He says that being unselfish, no matter what your religion is the key to becoming perfect. He talks about how the universe starts from a place of freedom, then goes through a phase of limitations and bondage, and finally returns to freedom. Our individual lives are like tiny whirlpools in this vast, infinite being, and we have to navigate through them to find our way back to that original freedom.
So basically, karma yoga is about working towards inner freedom by practicing detachment.
Exactly. He defines karma yoga as the knowledge of the secret of work, working for liberty. And he keeps saying, work incessantly, but give up all attachment to work. It's not the work itself that makes us unhappy. That's how attached we are to the results. When we identify with our work and what we achieve, it creates suffering. Like when a beautiful picture is destroyed and it causes you pain because you're clinging to it. Selfishness creates this illusion of I and mine, which leads to bondage. The goal is to get rid of that selfish tendency and to work in the world without getting caught up in it, like a lotus leaf that stays clean even though it's in the water. That state is called vairagya, or dispassion.
And there are two main ways to cultivate this non-attachment, right?
Right. You can consciously try to be detached in your thoughts and actions using your will and your judgment. Or, if you're religious, you can offer the result of your work to God, seeing yourself as a servant of the divine. Both ways involve letting go of that ego and finding peace within yourself no matter what's going on around you. He even suggests that our normal ideas of duty can be rooted in attachment and lead to unhappiness. He says we should work as free beings, not forced by anything or expecting rewards. We should leave everything to God. He says if you expect a reward, you're also opening yourself up to punishment when things don't go your way. The only way to be free from suffering is to stop chasing personal happiness. He says don't seek praise or recognition because truly great people are often unknown. It's like those pure sattvika individuals who are connected to God and act from pure love without needing any acknowledgement. He says even people who seem to be doing good work and are super active still have some impurities inside. Real detachment comes when you understand that there's a higher power at work and you surrender to that. He says all our efforts in this gymnasium of the world are really just for our own growth. And working with that understanding is what leads to perfect non-attachment and true freedom.
And finally, he talks about the ideal of karma yoga and gives the example of Buddha.
Yeah, Vivekananda points out that different spiritual paths, whether it's through work, love, psychology, or knowledge, they all lead to the same goal, liberation. And often, these paths get mixed together in our lives. He says the driving force behind all of it is our innate desire for freedom. And the biggest obstacle is our selfishness. He even defines morality as being unselfish. Of course, putting that into practice can be messy, but the end goal is the same, freedom, which we can reach through perfect unselfishness.
And he sees Buddha as the ultimate example of someone who achieved this.
Absolutely. He presents the Buddha as the embodiment of karma yoga. He acted completely selflessly, without any desire for personal gain, recognition, or reward. The Buddha was all about doing good and being good, and that's how he reached liberation and ultimate truth. Vivekananda highlights Buddha's incredible unselfishness, his wisdom, his boundless compassion, and the huge impact his work had. He calls Buddha a revolutionary reformer who encouraged people to think for themselves and act for the good of all.
So working without any selfish motives at all, that's how you become like the Buddha. That's how you change the world.
Exactly. That's the highest ideal of karma yoga.
So to recap everything for our listeners, we've gone deep into the heart of karma yoga as Swami Vivekananda teaches it. We talked about how all our actions shape our character, how seeking wisdom is more important than chasing fleeting happiness, and how doing our work can actually unlock hidden potential within us. We also looked at the idea of working without selfish motives, finding that balance between staying active and resting, understanding what duty means in our lives, and maybe most importantly, the power of non-attachment in our journey towards real freedom.
As you go about your day, maybe you'll find yourself thinking about why you do the things you do, both big and small. Hopefully, this has given you some new ways to think about your work and how it connects to your own personal growth.
And here's a final thought for you to chew on. If every action, no matter how small, really does leave a mark on us and the world, what kind of world and what kind of person are you creating with your daily karma?
Definitely gives you something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.